towards June and towards the beginning of the summer break. Um, so it seems like this is a pretty good time of the evening and time of the week for many people. But since we're going to be having a fairly long hiatus and then restarting in mid-July, if there is any time of day or day of the week that would work better for people, that would allow more people to come, you're certainly welcome to share that with us. So we have a flexible schedule. Um, the only thing that constrains the schedule is whatever the owners of Light After Loss might be doing here on an evening. So that's why we don't. I think was it Thursday that we couldn't do it? It was one. I think it was Monday or Wednesday this last year that were kind of off limits to us. But we can always check with the owners to see if that's going to change at all. But so yeah, if you do have any requests for a different time or date, please let us know at some point so that we can kind of factor that into optimizing the time that we do this. Also, a couple of announcements. So June 7th, which is the day I'm leaving for the Rockies, there's going to be a wellness fair and market here in this very space, and also both inside and outside. This is an annual event that Merging Hearts does, and this year we're partnering with the Hope and Healing Center, which is this building. So it's free. There's all sorts of things going on there. So this is I think the flyer's on the table over there. So be sure to check that out. And then also we have, this is almost up to date. It says we're located at Yoga Central, which we're not, but you know where we are anyway. But this kind of gives you a list of the other things besides this series that are done here. There's a lot of different series. There's a late Sunday morning event called the Spiritual Roundtable. There's usually something different every week for that. Um, there's a Course in Miracles book study that goes on every week. That's every Wednesday, it says. And then there's a healing share, which is something that happens on Tuesday nights downstairs when we're upstairs. So anyway, this information is over there on the table, and there's also a QR code for donations and stuff like that. So do grab whatever flyers over there in case you want to get information on that. Okay, so entire Bible, where we do the entire Bible. We've actually accomplished something that very few people have done. We have looked at the entire Torah, the first part of the Bible, in maybe 2.5 months. So we're getting ready to start part 2 of the Bible. We've done all of that. We've done all of that so far. And as we know, the term Torah means instruction, and that reflects that kind of central theme of those books, which is the creation of a community that is invited to emulate the divine, right? To seek holiness and so forth. And then the instruction is basically how to live that way. But then, of course, it's also the story of them getting to their land. We saw Moses was about to buy the farm, and so he had to give a very long speech about how the new generation could stick it out the way they're supposed to, just as they're about to enter the land. So as we enter into the second part of the Bible, in the Jewish Bible, this is called the prophets, the Nevi'im. And there are two subdivisions of this group. There's the former prophets, which we're now going to be entering into, and then the latter prophets. When non-Jews hear the word prophets, they normally think of the latter prophets: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, etc. Those are the names that kind of pop up. But actually, these books are called the former prophets, partly because prophets are major characters within them, although not in the book that we're looking at tonight. The book of Joshua has no prophet. Moses was the only prophet. He made Joshua the leader, but Joshua is no prophet. So there's this hiatus here, but we'll see some in the coming books after that. So that's how the Jewish Bible is organized. And if you wanted to think of it as a theme, part 1 is sort of the origin story of a community. Part 2 is the community in its land, the history of the community, its land, and how it ultimately loses it. This is a story of failure. As we saw from the Song of Moses at the end, where he says things are going to go bad, they're going to go wrong. But if you return to Yahweh, Yahweh will return to you. So there's this hopefulness to it as well. So this is essentially the working out of that in real time and space. And then finally, there is this third part, which we won't get to for a while, called the Ketuvim, the writings, which is kind of an odd title because they're all writings, aren't they? So presumably these were called the writings because they weren't the Torah or the prophets. Very also likely, this is sort of a catchment bowl for everything that is not there because these two parts of the Bible were, in a sense, finalized, canonized in the form that we have them first. And we know this from various texts during kind of the turn of the eras, the first century BC, first century AD, where we have various formulations of scripture in which it has three parts to it. There's the Torah, the prophets, and then everything else. Even Jesus, when he talks about the Bible, he says the Torah, the prophets, and the Psalms, which is one of the famous books that leads this off. But anyway, this is something completely different, as Monty Python would say, and we'll spend lots of time in that when we get to it. But now we're in linear history now. Okay, so that's how it fits into the Jewish Bible, the book of Joshua. And in the Christian Bible, it also heads part two. The Christian Bible divides the same sort of collection of books into four categories instead of three, but this is the same, and then we go to Joshua. So we'll be looking at Joshua tonight. Okay, the backstory. This is a reminder. So the Israelites' claim to the land of Canaan derives from God's oath that he would give it to them, not for any merit that they possess. Right? That's something that Moses kind of drove home, that this is going to happen because the people living in the land are bad people, and you're going to replace them, but not because you're good, because God loves you, right? That theme of divine love. However, taking the land involves warfare because the land is inhabited. We've heard about this at various points in the Torah that kind of anticipates. God intends to destroy these inhabitants and will use the Israelites as his soldiers. This is very different from everything that's gone before, because remember in the Exodus, God says, just stay cool and sit tight and I'll do everything. Right? He's the one who destroys the Egyptian army. He doesn't ask the Israelites to fight. But now he says, you're going to fight to inherit this land. So it's a story of war. Now, I use the term inhabitants very broadly, but in the book of Joshua that they're reading, that the inhabitants, the Canaanites, are basically characterized as city dwellers, city-states that have kings that are very warlike. So it's not like these are peace-loving people. They're belligerent, and they're run by people who are very violent. But still, one wonders, why do they need to be destroyed? So the two explanations that are offered are, first, because they're bad. If you've ever seen the movie True Lies with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis, where he's this kind of secret agent guy who lives a double life and his wife doesn't know that he's a secret agent, they both get captured by the bad guys and they're like, tied up. They give him sodium pentothal to question him. And she asks, so he'll tell me anything that I want, he'll tell the truth? And they get, yeah. And so she said, did you ever kill anyone? He said, yeah, but they were all bad. It's kind of funny, but I think that it says something about that sometimes stories are of a sort that they're black and white, that on the other side there's no good people. They're like the Harkonnens in Dune, right? There's nothing good about them. That's kind of the way the Canaanites are portrayed here. Now, thankfully, we have a library. This is not the only account of things. There's plenty of other stories where you have people who diverge from that stereotype. But this is a war story where the bad guys are really bad and the good guys, well, they do their best. And this is the other reason. This is something we read about in the Torah, that their existence poses a threat to Israel's loyalty to God. If you let these people live, they will draw you away from me, and I can't have that. So in other words, the indigenous people are seen as a threat to be annihilated. Now, so we're dealing with the theme of genocide here, which is not a happy theme, and it's certainly been a reality in human history at many points, including our own. And this narrative. First of all, what are the terms of the narrative itself? How does it describe the scenario? And I think once we acknowledge what it is, we'll actually find that there are some interesting surprises that don't conform maybe to our idea of, oh, it's terrible that they're annihilating people. But anyway, we're going to talk about this, and then I'm going to also do a kind of a jump ahead to to some passages in the New Testament, right? We're doing this chronologically through the canon. We're going to talk about the New Testament later because one of the ways that Christians certainly try to massage this narrative and say, well, that was back in the old days, and then Jesus made it all better. Uh-uh. We'll find out that the tradition of what's called herem, or the annihilation of the enemy, is just as much a part of Jesus's action and teaching as it is of the Old Testament. It just has a different opponent. Right? So that's one benefit to understanding this concept of warfare, is that it doesn't go away. It stays within the whole tradition, whether we like it or not. Okay. So the book of Joshua, there are 3 parts to it. The first part is mainly a war. The war is won by chapter 12, and then there's a division of the land for Israel to inherit. It's also interesting when we talked about the bad guys are all these urban city dwellers, Harkonnen types with violent kings. When the land is apportioned out to the Israelites, they are not given cities. It is a rural form of existence, small farming communities, not sort of big military industrial states. So there may be also a kind of critique of militarism itself here. Who knows? But in any case, they divide the land, and then Joshua says, farewell, I have to die now. So that is basically the structure of the book. We're going to mainly look at this. All right. So if we remember who Joshua was, he was a general, Moses' assistant, a scout, and Moses' successor from the Torah. What we'll see in this book is that his leadership parallels that of Moses, but also differs from it, because no one can be Moses, right? But there's a connection between the two, which we'll see. The main difference involves the law, the Torah. Moses gives it, Joshua obeys it. He can't actually deliver any laws. Right? So there's, again, a separation of powers. Executive branch, judicial branch, they're separate now, right? And in that sense, even though he is not a king, Joshua will be kind of the model of future kings in terms of the limitations of their powers. Next, God inaugurates Joshua's leadership by a theophany, a divine show of power that resembles the one that inaugurated Moses' leadership. Now, of course, when did Moses become the leader? Well, you could argue any point in the Exodus story, but the real point was when they crossed the sea, right? They crossed the sea, God destroyed the Pharaoh's army, and it says, and they believed that they trusted in Moses now as their leader. So that was sort of his rite of passage through this phenomenal, CGI extravaganza of crossing the sea on dry land. The same thing will happen here, only except it won't be a sea, it's going to be a river. So they're going to cross the river miraculously, and Joshua will be the leader. So that's the startup here. Okay, so what actually happens? Joshua is exhorted to be a leader. He sends scouts or spies to spy out the land. They cross the Jordan River. That's the equivalent of crossing the Red Sea. He sets up a memorial of the Exodus. He encounters an angel, just like Moses did on the mountain. Then there's a war, a battle that takes place in the city of Jericho. You may have heard that term before, the Jericho siren, the walls of Jericho. In popular culture, that's a reference to this. So we'll hear about that. So there's a successful battle against an evil king, and then there's an unsuccessful battle and an explanation of why they failed. And then there's a renewal of the covenant. So that's basically what we're looking at. Okay, begins with a pep talk. God speaks to Joshua. He says, Moses is dead. So now you are the one who's going to cross with the Israelites into the land that I promised. Notice the highlighted sections here. Whenever he's talking to you, he says, just as I promised Moses, so now you're going to do. As I was with Moses, so I'll be with you. Just be strong and steadfast. Be careful to observe the entire law which Moses, my servant, enjoined on you. Notice there's the difference. Moses gives the law, but Joshua obeys it. Okay. Israel embraces his leadership. Again, notice this callback to Moses. Just as we obeyed Moses, we'll obey you. May the Lord God be with you, just as he was with Moses. Then they have a preparation for this divine manifestation that will demonstrate Joshua's leadership. Notice how this mirrors how what happened at the mountain in the book of Exodus, right? Moses prepares the people for a divine manifestation. Joshua does the same thing. And the purpose of this manifestation of power is so that they'll believe in Moses and that they'll know that I'm with you just like I was with Moses. They crossed the waters on dry land, right? Here's where they crossed the sea for Moses. Again, it's almost the same here, only they're crossing a river, right? They on the soles of their feet, they crossed this river, and the water ceased to flow, right? They crossed on dry ground. So we have the whole story of the journey, right? Begins with a crossing of water on dry ground and ends with a crossing of water on dry ground. Then they leave a memorial, just like Moses made a memorial at the mountain of Sinai to mark the beginning of the covenant, so too Joshua is made to set up a memorial, which he is to explain to the next generation. In both cases, this theophany leads the hostile nations around to tremble, to melt with fear, right? Both when they cross the sea and when they cross the Jordan. If they can make water move, they're dangerous, right? In both cases, there's a scene in which circumcision, right? Because that's the mark of the Abraham covenant. Remember, this was this weird scene where God decided he was going to kill Moses after appointing him, and somehow he is saved from this divine, violence by his wife circumcising his son's foreskin with a flint knife. And the same thing here. Once apparently the new generation, right, that's entering the land, they've not been circumcised, so now they're circumcised again. Again, it just marks that they've had this rite of passage. When they were wandering in the desert, right, God gave them bread, right, the manna to eat. Well, now we're told that they ate this manna until they came to the land, and then the manna ceased. Same thing here happens. When they get to the land, it stops, indicating that now they're going to grow their own food. In a sense, it is moving from divine provision to human resourcefulness, right? So all these callbacks create a sense of continuity. Finally, how was Moses appointed? He was standing on holy ground, right? He goes up the mountain and God says, this is holy ground, take your sandals off. Same thing happens to Joshua. He was standing near Jericho. He saw someone standing with a drawn sword and he said, are you one of ours or one of theirs? He says, I'm neither. I'm the commander of the army of the Lord and I've come, meaning he's like an angel. Then the angel says, remove your sandals from your feet. The place on which you stand is holy. Now, that's a nice callback, but it also makes a point that the nature of this conflict, this war that's going to be waged, is not going to be any conflict. It's going to be a holy war. It's going to be a war that is waged with certain rules and certain goals. It's interesting, again, we have this term holy war. We've used this generically to refer to religiously inspired violence. It comes from the Bible, not from anywhere else. After 9/11, it was, Islamophobia. It's all the Muslims. They have this whole, no, they don't have a holy war in their tradition. That's not a term in Islam. That's a term in the Bible. Okay, so now we're going to go to talking about the nature of this warfare. The operative term in Hebrew is harem. And harem literally means forbidden, prohibited. If you've heard of the term a harem, what is a harem? When you heard the word, that king has a harem. What do we mean by harem? It's like a bevy of wives or a bevy of women that serves his needs, right? And that's called a harem in later tradition. It has the same meaning of this. That means that these women are forbidden to other people except the king. In Islam, the sacred city of Mecca, right? That's where Muslims, pray towards every day. That's called a haram, a sacred place where violence is not permitted, right? There's certain things you can't do in a sacred place. So the term haram just means that you can't do certain things, but it takes on a particular meaning in the context of warfare. So this is actually not a passage from the Bible. It's a passage from a stone stela, a victory stela, that wasn't actually written by an Israelite, but by one of their neighbors. His name was Mesha, king of Moab. Moab is like one of the the place is in modern day Jordan on the other side of the Dead Sea, where you have theoretically, and our cousins that descended from Abraham, the Moabites. And there was warfare between the Israelites and the Moabites at various times. Well, Mesha wrote this sort of victory self-congratulation about how he defeated the Israelites. And here's what he says. This is one passage that uses that term harem. He says, I went by night and fought against the city of Nebo. That was the city of the Israelites. From break of dawn until noon, taking it and slaying all, 7,000 men, boys, women, girls, and maidservants. For I had made them, the people I slew, I made them harem to Ashtar Kamosh. Kamosh was the name of the Moabite deity. So what does it mean to make someone or something harem to a god? It means that you're, in a sense, well, at one level, it's kind of like, it's not quite a human sacrifice. It's not quite on that level, but you're devoting that, not just the people you're killing, but you're devoting all of their property. It is the god's property because the god helped me win the battle. So this is a gift basically to the deity. And so to make someone harem means to kill them, right? And we'll see that idea, it's often translated to put someone under the ban. In other words, once you kill them and take their territory, it's not yours, it belongs to your God, whichever God you worship. That's the language that you have here in the book of Joshua. So what we know from this is that the understanding of warfare in the book of Joshua wasn't something that the Bible invented. It was a way in which warfare could be explained and justified with potentially certain consequences. But anyway, that's some evidence of this idea of harem. Okay, so now we get to the story. So the first city they have to take is Jericho, right? This city in the Jordan Valley. It's still around today. It is actually probably the oldest city in the world. The oldest urban space that human beings have created. It goes back to like at least 8,000 BC. This is taking place notionally around 12, 11, 1000 BC. So this city has been, or at least the site of this city has been occupied for 7 millennia. So it is, in a sense, it's the archetypal city, the archetypal representation of urban humanity and the concentration of royal power. So Joshua says he sends spies. I want you to send spies, reconnoiter the land, tell me, let's get some intelligence on this place. Okay, so they go. And we're told when they reached Jericho, they went into the house of a prostitute named Rahab, where they lodged. Not sure why they decided to lodge in the bordello in the town. Maybe it was because they didn't think it would attract attention, or maybe they had some other things in mind. Who knows? Okay, so they stay with Rahab. Immediately after that, the king of Jericho hears about it. He hears that spies have come out to spy out the land. The king says, bring the men here. I'm going to question them. So he sends word to Rahab, bring these men here. But Rahab says, oh, yeah, there were some guys here, but I don't know where they came from. At dark, when it was time to close the gate, they left. I don't know where they went. You'll have to pursue them over if you want to overtake them quickly. In other words, they went that way. But she hid them, right? So she's saving their lives, basically. Why did she do that? We don't know yet, but we're going to find out. So we're told she hid them on her roof. She put stalks of flax to cover them up there. And after the bad guys went searching for them in the wrong direction, she has a conversation with them. She says, I know that the Lord, Yahweh, has given you the land, and that dread of you has come upon us, that the inhabitants of the land tremble with fear because of you. For we have heard how he dried up the waters of the Red Sea and did all these things to your enemies. This has dispirited us. There's no way, we know we can't fight against you. Now then, swear to me by the Lord that since I am showing kindness to you, you in turn will show kindness to my family. Give me a reliable sign that you will allow my father and mother, brothers and sisters, my whole family to live, that you will not deliver us to death. Okay, so now we know why she hid them. It was out of self-interest. It was out of preservation, right? The rationale here She doesn't beg for mercy. She just says, I've shown you kindness. Now you should show me kindness, right? The term is actually chesed in Hebrew. Chesed is a divine attribute. It is one way that Moses describes God's solicitude for Israel. So here we have a Canaanite, one of the bad guys, who is behaving like God. She's showing them chesed, right? And they have no claim on her, right? She could have said, they're here, king, take them, right? But she chooses, again, out of a sense of self-preservation, to save them. How do they respond to this? Well, they say, we pledge our lives to you. If you don't betray our mission, we'll be faithful in showing chesed to you when Yahweh gives us the land. Okay, let's pause here for a second. Okay, we can understand why they would be grateful, because otherwise they might be dead at this point. But they are under orders from their God to exterminate her and every other Canaanite that lives. Notice they didn't ask permission to do this. Now, maybe they're just saying, oh, I hope we don't get in trouble for this. No, they say, we will do this. So one of the surprises in this narrative is not that it's a narrative of genocide, but that individual actors within the story ignore the command to genocide, and they are not criticized for it. We'll continue with this. Okay, so she lets them down. She tells them how to get back to their own place safely, and then they give her this sign. They say, we're not going to follow through with this unless, when we come into the land, you tie this scarlet cord. Where's the cord? Here it is. You tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you are letting us down. Gather your family together, and if any of them go outside when we're slaughtering everyone, it's their fault. But if you stay inside, nothing will happen to you. As long as you don't betray our mission, we'll follow through with this. So this is an interesting sign and an interesting set of instructions. The instructions make sense because this is going to be a war zone. Stay out of it, right? Can you think of any other significant story, though, in the Torah where staying inside your house with a sign on the door is what protects you from being killed? Passover. This is parallel to Passover. There's Passover, a different sign, but same thing. You put a visible sign outside your door to protect yourself and your family. Now, again, this is something they're coming up with. They didn't say, and God gave them this inspired idea. No, somehow the understanding of what they're doing includes the capacity to make exceptions and to model those exceptions on their own experience. Right? Remember, many of the commandments in the Torah are, don't treat the resident alien badly because you know what it's like to be in that position of vulnerability. Are they learning from that? Are they illustrating that perhaps here? Okay, so she says, let's do it. She puts the scarlet cord there. They go back. Eventually, they get to Joshua, and we're told they told him all that had happened to them. They didn't specifically mention the cord, but presumably they mentioned that too, which means that they mentioned the deal they made. And there's nothing here about Joshua saying how you shouldn't have done that. They just say, we're going to win. So here's a photograph, aerial photograph of Tel Es Sultan, which is the name of the ruin of Jericho. So you can see this is sort of the modern town over here, and around here, farms, and then you have this big mound. A tel is the term in Arabic for a mound. And so if you ever hear about archaeological sites, it's often tell this and tell that. It just means a mound, right? So you can kind of see, even though it's not great resolution, you can see that there are now, various excavations at various points here. Again, this is an 8,000-year-old town. Archaeology works very slowly, but you can imagine, given the fame of this story, archaeologists since the beginning of the 20th century wanted to dig down and find out what they could find. By the way, one of the interesting things they found is that there was no wall around Jericho at this time. And guess what the story's about? Bringing the walls of Jericho down. So there's something fictional about this story that we're about to read. But again, if the authors or the originators of the tradition about what happens at Jericho, they live around here, they see this big mountain. Well, how did that fall down? Well, maybe there was something to do with God there. Okay, so God says to Joshua, it's time to take Jericho. take out its kings and its warriors, circle the city for 6 days and blow horns and trumpets. And on the 7th day, the wall of the city will collapse and the people shall attack straight ahead. Okay, so again, God's going to bring the walls down, and then you get to attack them. So we have this very famous long drawn-out scene in which the people are carrying the box, right, the ark, which is symbolically that's the footstool of God's throne. So as it were, they're carrying their king around with them, who's going to bring the walls down. God is the one who's fighting for them, right? Finally, the wall collapsed. This, by the way, is my son Getty's painting, which is not yet finished. He's working on this. So the wall collapses. On the 7th day, the people attack. Okay, as a result of that, now we have to figure out what's going to happen with Rahav. So here, Joshua says to the spies, go to the prostitute's house, bring out the woman with all her family as you swore to her you would do. And so they do. They bring them away from the city so they're not harmed by it. The city itself is destroyed, but we're told that because Rahav the prostitute had hidden the messengers whom Joshua had sent to reconnoiter, Joshua let her live along with her father's house and all the family who dwell in the midst of Israel to this day. Oh, I thought we weren't supposed to let Canaanites dwell amongst us. Except when they do, right? I often wonder, why is, of all the sort of characters you might want to put in this role, why have a prostitute as the one who, in a sense, goes over to the other side? I mean, this is emphasized several times. She's the prostitute. This is her house of work. Why focus on that, do you think?
She's a sinner.
Oh, it doesn't say anything about her being a sinner.
I mean, does that have to do with New Testament?
Maybe they get a bit more uptight back then, yeah. There's nothing about her being bad. In fact, she shows divine mercy. She shows chesed, right? What's another possible way we could read this?
Maybe they wanted her service.
That might have been the reason why they went there in the first place. Who knows? We're not told. My thought, and it's just, there's no answer to this, but my thought, it's a question that the text raises. My thought is that if she's a prostitute, then even though she has a family, obviously, she's not married. She doesn't have her own household. And therefore, she's not, symbolically, she's not embedded in the power structure of the city, and might, in fact, not have much vested interest in the status quo. Now, I'm not saying that prostitutes and other sex workers can't make a good living. Many of them do. But just maybe, out of all the types of people who might not want the urban power structure to continue, maybe she has the least to lose. But anyway, this is the sorts of ways that we think about these questions. Anyway, so again, notice that Joshua hadn't had any conversation with them. They made it up. He accepted it, right, as their leader. It doesn't say he consulted God. Is this okay for us to do? No, he just assumes that he will do it, right? Okay. So success. They take Jericho. Now there's the opposite. There's failure. So the next city on the devastation list is a city that in the book of Joshua is called Ai, which literally means ruin. Presumably you wouldn't name your city Ruin unless it was already ruined. But anyway, why is that city ruined? We must have destroyed it. But this time they're going to fail. They will fail to take it because we're told in this story, the Israelites acted treacherously with regard to the ban, to Herem. And so we're told about how someone breaks the rules of warfare, of engagement. This guy's name is Achan, and we're told that he took goods that were under the ban, and that made God angry because those are his goods. To dedicate them to him means you can't take advantage of them. If you wanted to find any kind of silver lining in a story of genocide, it might be this provision that often genocides take place out of self-interest. Right? The group that afflicts people wants to get their stuff. Here, an Israelite tries to do that, and it's going to turn out bad for the Israelites. Okay, so how does it work? So they go to Ai. There's the next city here, a little above Jericho. He sends spies, and the spies say, it's okay, there's not a lot of people there, we can beat them. But then when they have their fight, the Israelites lose. And so the Israelites are now fearful. So they totally blow it. So Joshua talks to the box, basically says, God, why did you let this happen? And it's much a similar kind of complaint speech like we saw with Moses. It would have been better if we died in Egypt than to bring us all the way here and be defeated. Why did this happen? So then God explains to him, because one of you has sinned. They have transgressed the covenant which I enjoined on them. They've taken the goods subject to the ban. They've stolen and lied. If they cannot stand up to their enemies, it's because they are now at the ban. Notice here's God saying, okay, if you break the rules, then I'm going to take you guys out. So it's not like he's just favoring the Israelites for the sake of favoring the Israelites, right? There's a content to it. Okay, so he says, let's get this settled here. So he gives a long description about how we're going to figure out who did it. So he said, let's take each tribe and each clan and each family. Let's see which one of you did it. So eventually they find out that it was this guy Achan. And once he finds it out, they say, bring all the stuff you stole out here. And then he kind of says, confess what you did. He says, I wanted all the money, basically. I wanted the spoils. There was this great Babylonian mantle and 200 shekels of silver, bars of gold. I wanted them. Wasn't that the last commandment? Don't covet things that aren't yours. Okay, so he done wrong. And so the response is to stone him and his family and their livestock. So again, not a very pleasant end. In fact, they pile stones on top of the guy to remind us not to steal and lie in combat, not to use warfare as a excuse for violating other laws, as it always happens to do, right? Okay, so we have a success story, a failure story, and the reason was that the rules of harem were not followed. But this raises the question, the rules of harem were not followed with Rahab either. They didn't kill her, and they weren't defeated. So why was that okay and this not okay? The text doesn't tell us, but it raises the question. Obviously, God is perfectly happy to condemn and destroy people who are breaking the rules, but only some of the rules. Right? Okay, so that means not all rules are the same. Okay, there's one other scene that is another example of this breaking the rules with a strange outcome. So with two cities down now, there's another city, the city of Gibeon. They hear what's going on and they say, we collectively have to save ourselves. We cannot fight these people. We need to find an alternative to fighting and dying. So first of all, you need to know something about the rules of engagement in Deuteronomy, which was what we looked at last week. And here's how it goes. It says, when you attack a city, and when you're in warfare, there's two possibilities. If the cities belong to peoples that the Lord your God is giving you as a heritage. And if they're Canaanites, you have to destroy them all. But if the people are from a city that's from a long ways away, in other words, if they're not Canaanites, if it agrees to terms of peace, you shall let them become forced laborers. Again, slavery, not something criticized, but you don't kill them. If it refuses to make peace with you, and you defeat them in battle, kill all the men, but don't kill the women, children, and livestock. So again, there's a difference between how you treat Canaanites and how you treat everyone else. That's a background to the Gibeonites. So the Gibeonites basically say, we have to convince them that we're not Canaanites. How are we going to do that? So here's what they do. We're told that they choose provisions for a journey. They make use of old sacks for their donkeys and old wineskins that are torn and mended. So they wear old patched sandals and shabby garments and crumbly bread, and then they go to see Joshua. Guess what they're going to do? They're going to say, oh, we live a long ways away. Look at all our stuff, how it's deteriorated on the way. That's how far away we live. So they come there and they talk to Joshua and say, hey, we're from a far off land. And we've heard of how famous, how lethal your God is and all this, right? And so because you're so powerful, we'd like to make a covenant with you. We'd like to be your servants. What an honor it would be for us, right? And look, by the way, to prove that we're from a long ways away, look, our bread is cold and crumbly. Our wineskins are mended, are torn. Our garments and sandals, we've been walking for a long way. So they trick Joshua. So Joshua says, okay, let's all eat together and be nice, and I'll swear an oath will never harm you. Okay, then Gibeon comes as a city that's going to be besieged, and Joshua discovers that the Gibeonites are the people they just swore to be peaceful with. So the leaders of the community cannot do anything. Notice that in both of these stories in which there's an exception to the rule, an oath was sworn, right? An oath was sworn to Rahab, an oath has been sworn to the Gibeonites. The situations are a bit different, right? You know, Rahab had actually saved their lives. These people have not saved the Israelites' lives. They've simply lied to them. Joshua reprimands them. He says, we can't do anything to them because we made an oath. So he says, why did you deceive us and say we live far off? You live among us. Now you're accursed. Every day you shall have to be a slave to us, but we can't kill you. Again, modern standards, this would not be good news. But here Joshua, we're told he never consulted God about it again, just like the spies didn't, and yet he has to hold by his oath. Apparently, keeping an oath is more important, even if you were deceived into keeping it, it's more important than carrying out a divine command to massacre people. Okay, so we're told that they're basically going to live together with us. We'll treat you as second-class citizens, but we're not going to kill you, even though you're Canaanites. And you might have, if the whole point of this harem thing was that God was inflexible, no, we have to kill them all because they're all bad. God doesn't criticize them for doing this. He doesn't criticize them for making this exception. Okay, so we're told that he did this. Okay, so here's our basic question. Why does the sparing of Rahab and the Gibeonites not provoke God's anger, but Achan's theft and lying does? Again, the command, don't leave a single soul alive, kill them all. But here, Achan, they killed them all, but Achan takes the stuff. And then we're told the Lord was angry about this. But with Rahab, God is neither consulted nor angered by it. With the Gibeonites, no one is angered, except that it said the reason why we let them live is because if we broke our oath, then wrath would fall upon us from the same God who's commanding us to kill them. So do you kind of see that there's something going on here? There's some sort of latent value here beneath this conflict that's more important than the command to get rid of the Canaanites. How would we define that? How would we define that? Amidst genocide, which is fairly absolute, what's this deeper value beneath here that has to be maintained even in these harsh circumstances? What would we call that? I mean, maybe it's a different value here and a different value there. We were told that because she saved the spies, we will save her. Even though they didn't do anything for us, they tricked us into swearing the oath, we will not break the oath. Sorry, what is it?
Yeah.
So the oath is present in both cases. So keeping the oath is obviously important. Well, why is keeping an oath important? What if people didn't keep oaths? We see that today when people don't keep promises, right? So obviously trust and truthfulness are important for any human community to function, right? And when people lie, and especially lie under oath, then it deteriorates the basic trust necessary for human flourishing. Add to that, these are oaths sworn in the name of the God who you were doing this with, right? So if you made Yahweh's name accomplice to a broken oath, then you're making Yahweh, you're making the source of all things part of what's deteriorating things, which would not be good either, right? So there's definitely the oaths, but there's also, in her case, it's that she showed chesed, she showed kindness. And so again, when Arnold Schwarzenegger said, yeah, I killed people, they were all bad. Well, here's a Canaanite who wasn't bad. Maybe there were others that weren't bad. Maybe there are others whose stories didn't make it into here. This particular book has a particular angle to push about this event, if it even happened. But this is the point is that that even in the seemingly terrible to us circumstances, other values are just as important, if not more important. And the text doesn't tell you that; it just shows you that.
Yeah. Didn't he have a lot of problem later on with Bacon?
Well, not with him because he died, right?
It seemed like I remember.
Maybe you're thinking about a different person starting with the name A,
Oh.
like Ahab, maybe. Yeah. So that's why I find that this is why the Bible's interesting. It's interesting because even when it seems to be doing one thing, it's forcing the reader to question what's going on. Right? It fosters critical thinking rather than dampening it. Right? Because if Joshua's like God said it, I'll do it. Let's kill her too. Let's kill her family. We wouldn't want to disobey God. Well, but we know that there's a tradition about talking back to God. Even now, Joshua doesn't talk back to him, but of course, Moses is the paradigm of this, right? Moses has to talk. Moses has to push back because if he allows divine wrath to go in one way, it's going to undermine the whole project. Similarly, with Abraham, remember in Genesis 18, God puts Abraham on the spot. He says, I'm going to force him to fight with me on this so that he learns what is just and right. So beneath like I said, there is no command ethics in the Bible. God gives commands, but there's a reason for them. And sometimes the commands need to be questioned. Actually, a couple of years ago, we had at Walsh some former NATO commanders, people who had led NATO during the early 2000s. And I talked to one of them, General Breedlove, and he said, it's really important in war, in combat, that you follow orders, except when the orders are unjust. If there is an unjust order, it is your duty to disobey it. Not just if it breaks a rule, if it's unjust. If you know it's wrong, you have to push back. So there seems to be, even at the human level, some recognition that rules are important, but exceptions are also part of the reality we live in. Reality is messy like that. Yeah. Okay, so that is Joshua. Now, again, often people say, okay, well, that was in the bad old days. God was violent, God was angry. And now, in the New Testament, we have peaceful Jesus who wouldn't harm a fly. And everyone's into love now rather than hate, and peace rather than war. Well, there's peace in the Old Testament as well, right? Like with the Gibeonite story we just looked at. So this is a very typical Christian move in Christian history, is to feel better about the hard parts of the Bible by dumping it on the Jews, right? Or the Israelites. That was them. We're nice, right? Not always, though, right? Anytime someone says they're the problem, whoever they are, distrust them. People are the problem, right? Okay, so let's take a look at how this tradition of harem plays out in a later age. Right? Okay, so we're going to look at two passages from the New Testament. One is in the story of Jesus, and then the other one is from the book of Revelation, which is a series of visions about Jesus. So a couple notes here. The conquest of Canaan in the book of Joshua contributes to the Gospel's depiction of Jesus' activity. Both stories begin with the crossing of the Jordan River. Where is Jesus baptized? The Jordan River. He begins his exodus where that exodus ended. Right? He kind of goes backwards. Both protagonists are named Joshua. Jesus is just the Greekified transcription of Joshua. Both engage in warfare aimed at dispossessing something, either the Canaanites or demons. Right? So in the Gospels, the big bad are not human beings, although they're pesky humans too. It's what are called unclean spirits, these sort of malevolent supernatural forces. They are treated as the Canaanites. They are treated as the object of his war. Now, if you've ever read the Gospels or are familiar with them, you often hear the language of exorcism. That term does not appear in the Gospels. That's a later idea that gets foisted upon it because it's a term that's conventional in English. Jesus did not exorcise anything; he cast things out. That's warfare language, not exorcism language. Exorcism was a practice in the ancient world, not just in Israel, but among the Greeks and the Romans. And it's a totally different vocabulary. In the Gospels, Jesus makes war. The other place that we find it is in the book of Revelation's depiction of the kingdom of God, which is sort of when God sort of finally puts things to rights. Jesus is presented as marching at the head of an army that observes the rules of Deuteronomy on sexual abstinence in warfare, which is part of the harem tradition. The battle that he wages results in the slaughter of all God's enemies. Change the name from Canaanites to all bad people, you have the same story. There is no change in the story. But it's going to be, you need to look where the clues are. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of this. Okay, so here's Jesus's message. Christians seem not to know what Jesus's message was. His message was that the kingdom of God is at hand. What is the kingdom of God? It is God acting as king, as sovereign over human history, which is what happens in the Exodus, right? He becomes king as a result of defeating another king. He invites the Israelites to become his subjects. They say yes, so he is now their king. He leads them in battle, right? So Jesus says, this is my message. It is here, right? It's at hand. At hand means it's drawn near. And so he says, change the way you're acting and believe that the kingdom of God is at hand. That's what the gospel means. The gospel is that the kingdom of God is at hand. Notice that to believe it follows the act of changing how you live. So it's not like he gives you a belief and then you're supposed to live it. You live it, and that is the act of believing it. That's how he does it. But let's see what it looks like. So again, the first sign or evidence that the kingdom is present or at hand is when we're told he sees a man with an unclean spirit, someone who is possessed, controlled by a malevolent force. And the Spirit speaks to Jesus saying, what have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? Okay, so this is about destruction. He says, shut up, come out of him. He does. And everyone says, oh, wow, this is powerful stuff. Okay, so that's his first demonstration, is an act of warfare, an act of destruction. There's another story, a very famous one, later on, where he goes to the other side of Lake Kinneret, that's outside of the sort of the Jewish territory, into the Gentile territory. And another man with an unclean spirit comes up to him. We're told that this guy had been dwelling among tombs and no one could restrain him anymore. So this malevolent force is expressed in terms of power. And we're told that when he shows up, again, there's this dialogue, don't torment me. And Jesus says, get out of him. And then he asks him, what is your name? My name is Legion, for we are many. So legion is a military term. So again, we're in the realm of warfare here. And we're told that the legion pleaded with Jesus not to drive them away from that territory. Notice it's about possessing land, not just people, just like in the book of Joshua. And so famously, he puts the unclean spirits into a herd of pigs, and they fall off the cliff and drown in the sea, just like the Pharaoh's army, right? And so you have these stories of Jesus waging harem, waging warfare, devoting enemies to destruction. Even it involves pigs in this case. Okay, skip ahead. So that's the life of Jesus. What about the visions about Jesus bringing the world to rights and all this in an apocalyptic future? So we have in this image a kind of cosmic war between the good guys and the bad guys. The good guys are described here as the Lamb. That's a way of talking about Jesus standing on Mount Zion. We haven't seen Mount Zion yet, but that's sort of the surrogate for Mount Sinai. So you have the warrior who's standing on top of the mountain with 144,000 soldiers, and there's all sorts of cosmic rumblings. There's battle songs that are being sung, and we're told that this army that he has, these are ones who have not defiled themselves with women. They are virgins, and these are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. What does that mean? What does that have to do with that? So in Deuteronomy, when men are waging war, they're not allowed to have sex. Somehow that's a peacetime activity, not a wartime activity. Whatever the reason for it is, you have this command. if you're waging herem, it says when you're doing this, you shall not engage in anything that doesn't consist with this war. In another famous later document, what's called the War Scroll, that's not in the Bible, that's from the Dead Sea Scrolls, where you had this community of Jews who saw themselves as this kind of embattled minority in society. It says, again, everyone who's in battle cannot engage in sex because the holy angels are there together with them. Somehow angels who don't have sex, if you're going to fight besides angels, you can't have sex either. Something like that. But was there an angel in the Joshua story? Yeah, that was the commander of the armies that showed up for him. Okay, so we discovered that in this vision of a final rectification of evil in the world, you have a war with people who are waging this holy war, alongside Jesus as their commander, like Joshua again, the same name in Hebrew. Another one that has similar language here. The seer who writes these visions say, I saw the heavens open, there was a white horse and a rider on it called Faithful and True. He judges and wages war in righteousness. The armies of heaven followed him, mounted on white horses and wearing clean white linen. Won't be clean for long, but anyway. So notice here it's the sharp sword of his mouth, that is to say, his sort of judgments, will strike the nations. He will tread the winepress of the fury and wrath of God. So here we have kingdom of God language, warfare language brought together. And finally, one last scene. This is after the battle has been fought, or is about to be fought, rather, an angel again is sort of heralding what's happening. He's saying, come, gather for God's great feast to eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of military officers, the flesh of warriors, of horses and their riders. So notice it's focusing on the military-industrial complex here again, just like in the book of Joshua. So all the bad kings and all the bad powerful armies, they're all going to be destroyed, and there will be a great gorging on flesh at the end. Okay, so gory language. But do we see how this idea of herem has persisted? It just takes on different language and different circumstances. So this is what I want to leave us with tonight. How should we think of this tradition? Obviously, I don't think we should engage in genocide. But it's one thing to say that and to say, yeah, that there's, and in fact, all religious traditions reject genocide, actually. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they all reject genocide. Do they always do it? No. But lest we think this is a peculiarly Abrahamic problem, no. Look at Myanmar. Look at the Buddhist nationalists who are massacring people of a different ethnicity and religion in their country. Any religion can be distorted, right? But given that, what do we do with this story? What do we do with this model? Again, this genocide may never actually have happened. The timeline is wrong for what we know about archaeology. There were no walls around Jericho to fall down in the first place. This may be an entirely fictive event, but that doesn't mean, oh gosh, that's good. No, that's more challenging. That means this was an ideal that was presented by someone. It was an ideal. And because it was an ideal for someone, it could be, and because it's in someone's sacred library, anyone who wants to engage in it through some very twisted logic might say, oh, well, we're doing like they did. We're waging a good fight like they did. That happens all the time in human history, unfortunately. So given the dangerousness of this text, and given obviously the abhorrence about, mass killing, what do we do with this idea? We've seen how it can be applied in different directions, but still, it's not a comforting idea. So let's think about this for a moment. What are some ways that we could approach this as, whether you're a person of faith or not? How could we evaluate this? I mean, it's not the only view of combat in the Bible. There are many other more congenial views, but this is there. You can't get rid of it. You could ignore it. That's what most people of goodwill do. They just ignore it, which is fine. But if you ignore it, the downside is that someone else who's not so of goodwill is going to use it and manipulate it. How do you prevent that manipulation from happening? It's there in the text. What do you do with it?
forgive.
Forgive. Okay. Well, you could say,
Make it true.
yeah. Well, and that's actually in all of the texts we've read of the Torah. Always make peace first. Don't never make war first. And that goes into the just war tradition later on in Western culture as well. So you can choose to do something other than this, obviously, which would be a good idea. One of the ways, let me throw some conventional tactics that people bring to thinking about. The first one to say, well, this was a unique event. It was only about this one time in history and can never be repeated. Anyone who claims to be waging holy war is making it up. Right? That's one way you could do it. What the weakness of that, though, is that it doesn't address the underlying logic of the narrative. Because if there's something underlying it, then people are going to be influenced by it potentially, even if you say that they shouldn't. My preference, at least, is to do what we did tonight, to say, okay, yeah, there is this story, and it is presented as an ideal. But within the ideal, there are countervailing forces. There's the concept of chesed, kindness, which overrides those divine commands without any consultation, without any permission. You just do it because that's what people should do when they are shown kindness. Even when you are deceived by the enemy, well, that's their job. That's them. They're deceiving. We can't do that, though. We cannot repay them in kind. So that even we need to I think, get down deep to what's going on in the psychology of the story, or at least of the characters as they're represented in the story. Those could be just as important as the paradigm that's presented. And that's why we have to look at the entire thing. We can't just look at the fortune cookie saying that agrees with us, right? Any other thoughts on this? I mean, genocide is a pretty important problem today, okay? And probably will be in the future, given the way human beings are. Maybe it's another interesting thing that if you focused on kind of the sociological differences in what's being destroyed and what's being built after it. Again, what's being destroyed is the military-industrial complex of Canaan, the royal cities of these violent kings. What's being replaced by peaceful farmers. So how could that be? So we say, well, it's not just good enough to say these people are bad, they're dangerous, we have to destroy them. Often people who engage in genocide are the people who have the military and political power. It's the majority in the country, where often they are the ones doing it, say, no, this book is against that. It's trying to dismantle that whole apparatus, right, as it was in Egypt with the Pharaoh. So it may not be acceptable simply to say the Canaanites equals our enemies. Maybe you have to say, what was it about the Canaanites, as presented here, that was objectionable? And what is better that would be put in place is not just you have a change of ethnicity, you have a change of the nature of society. We'll see this very much in the later prophets. They're very much interested in justice within society, especially in an agrarian society where the urban people don't get to oppress the peasants and so forth. So there may be a kind of sociological content to this that would have to be raised in evaluating it. So those are my two thoughts. Any other thoughts? I mean, this is here. You know it's here now. And if you ever see it being appealed to, you'll know where it comes from. Anything else?
One thing, the prostitute Harab,
Uh-huh.
isn't she listed? And I forget whether it's
She's one of Jesus's great grandmothers.
Yeah, so you couldn't kill off Jesus' grandma.
Oh, that's another way of looking at it. Yeah, Jesus is great. Okay,
She and
yeah,
are the only two females in the genealogy.
there's four actually. Yeah, but those are two. Yeah, so this is, I could have brought that up too. But yeah, in Matthew's gospel, Jesus has a genealogy, and most of it's boring patriarchy. But then there are these women who show up in the genealogy, one of whom is Rahab. Another one was Tamar, right? Judah's daughter-in-law, who he deprived of her rights, and eventually he ended up fathering her children. So you have these weird women in the story who are actually pretty important for the turn of events, both in the history and then also in this concept of who Jesus is. So yeah, there may be something about the characters themselves become important later on, maybe. But I just find it fascinating, disturbing at times, but fascinating too. And I guarantee you, if you go online and look at YouTube and all these terrible videos about it, you'll see no one talking about any of this. They'll just say, "Oh, and they had to kill them all because they were bad," just like Arnold Schwarzenegger said to Jamie Lee Curtis. You have people who deal with it only at this surface level, and as we've seen, the very nature of this narrative forces us below the surface level.
Well, when you're acting the way that God has spoken to you to act,
Mm-hmm.
I think self-preservation is taken into consideration.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are lied to or somebody makes an oath with you,
Mm-hmm.
that things can fall apart.
Yeah.
And that's all.
That's so repeating that what seems to be important about those characters, right, and about how they respond to them. Yeah, and again, this is where the Torah comes in, because in the Torah you also have all these ethical principles which are being carried out by these characters, even if they're on the wrong side of the battle, right? So that's maybe the function of the Torah as instruction. It instructs us how to read a narrative like this, right? There's even even within the Torah itself. Remember when we're looking at the holiness, be holy like me, says God, in that list of 18 commandments. There's the love your neighbor, love the non-neighbor as yourself. Later on, you have that thing about, well, if you want to, you can keep non-Israelite slaves indefinitely. It's legal, but if you love them as yourself, you wouldn't do that, would you? So even in the commandments themselves, there are countervailing tendencies, and the wisdom of living them is knowing where that balance falls, right? There's no such thing as blind obedience here. Blindness is a bad thing in the Bible. And most people who are blind don't do good things. And blind in the sense of, they're not looking at the story, right? So that's what maybe we could leave us with here tonight. Is just that if we get over the horrendous nature of the events and get below them to this kind of subtext, then even if it doesn't excuse the genocide, it allows us to see that there's more going on here than meets the eye, and precisely those things that people who actually commit genocide tend to ignore, right? Okay, well, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, you had to...
So do you think if we read these stories, we'll feel a little bit better about ourselves?
I don't know if feeling better about ourselves is the right word. I think being more aware of how we read, and that there is a responsibility to how we read as well, right?
If we were in that circumstance, we might not even done as well as things.
Yeah. Very good. Well, we'll leave it on that point. So thanks very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week for the Book of Judges. Really fun stories there.